Hello and welcome to the Wild Podcast, where we bring the best of the outdoors to wherever you are. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Andy. And in each episode we talk with world-class adventurers, athletes, scientists and creatives to unpack the untold stories of high performers, modern explorers and our wild places.
This episode is brought to you by Absolute Wilderness, delicious freeze-dried meals to fuel your next adventure, made locally in Nelson, New Zealand. My personal favourite is the Tom Kha Gai curry, but there are so many tasty options for every meal. Use the coupon code THEWILD at checkout to get 15% off your order until the end of February. Visit absolutewilderness.co.nz.
Hey guys, welcome to the second episode. Today's guest is Neil Silverwood. He's a caver, adventurer and award-winning photographer.
In this episode, we cover his uncanny introduction to photography, documenting climate science in Antarctica, dodging the Taliban in Afghanistan, and his many caving adventures, including a near-death experience.
Neil is a great storyteller and it was a super interesting chat. We hope you enjoy the show. Neil, welcome to the show.
Hey, no worries. Thank you.
A bit of a weird question to start, Neil, but with a name like Silverwood, it's almost as though you were destined for a life in the outdoors. It's kind of like a rock star name for an adventurer, you know? How did you get your start in the outdoors and that kind of lifestyle?
It is a cool name. Pretty proud of the old name, Silverwood. My dad was a caver, and so one of my first memories is getting dragged on an exploration caving trip, and there was a little crawlway at the bottom of this cave with a body tight squeeze through water, and as the smallest person at 10 years of age, I was forced to go through there. So I started out pretty young and had no choice but to become, an outdoorsy sort of person with a dad like that.
Whereabouts did you grow up, Neil, and where have you spent most of your life?
I grew up in a town called Waimangaroa, which is a town of about 200 people on the west coast of the South Island. And to be honest, I couldn't wait to get the hell out of here when I was growing up. It's a really, really quiet little place. Like I always remember, there was a scrub fire in town, and I walked down to the local store and I bumped into an old bloke and he said, "Oh, did you hear about the scrub fire?" I was like, "No, I didn't hear about the scrub fire." I went to the shop and they're like, "Oh, did you hear about the scrub fire?" And then walking home, I bumped into the local fire chief, who, funnily enough, was intellectually disabled, and also said, "Oh, did you hear about the scrub fire?" And that was the most exciting thing that happened in Waimangaroa in about 10 years, and I couldn't wait to get the hell out of there.
How do you think your upbringing influenced the direction your life's taken since then?
So my old man was a caver and got into it at a very young age, and every opportunity I had, I think from about 18 onwards, kind of sprung out of caving and getting into the outdoors. All the work I did, all the girlfriends along the way that I had at that stage were all cavers, all of my friends, so caving's given me a huge amount along the way.
Awesome. How did you sort of get into the photography? And it seems like that's opened a heap of doors for you. How do you sort of merge that as I guess it probably started as a hobby and merge that with your job of being a photographer?
So I got into photography. We were exploring in a cave called Stormy Pot, and we were trying to get the deepest cave in New Zealand. So the dream was to get a cave system which went from the top of Mount Arthur to the bottom, 1,200 metres, and we would go underground for up to a week at a time, living in really basic campsites, and you have these incredible adventures. We'd find brand new cave system, be the first human being through these passages, and have really epic experiences too, where the cave might flood, or we might get trapped inside the cave in a snowstorm and couldn't get out the entrance. And you'd come out, you tell your friends about these experiences, and they'd just go, "Oh, I would never do that. I would never go caving." What if the roof collapsed? What if there's an earthquake? I just couldn't see how incredible this whole other world could be. And so I wanted to try and capture it and get some images that would change perceptions on what our cave systems are like. So I went out and bought a really basic little DSLR, little digital camera, and and you'll laugh at this, but I actually learned how to use it by photographing teddy bears in my room. So I'd set up all the flash guns and then get the teddy bear in the centre and take a photo of it and tried to understand how artificial light works. And then went back underground, took some photos, and the results were absolutely dismal, just awful. And so I went away, practiced a lot more, got the hang of it, and took some okay shots, and then gave the New Zealand Geographic a call and said, how about we run a story on caving? And they were keen, and they gave me a chance. And so I've been working full-time as a photographer for the last 3 or 4 years. And that's kind of where it kicked off.
Have you wrecked any gear when you're caving? I imagine it's quite a hostile environment for photography gear.
Oh, we wreck unbelievable amounts of gear. So during the book, we destroyed a drone, which is, $4,000. We destroyed a 5D Mark III, which is like $5,500, and probably a good 10 flash guns, which are a few $100s each. And so, we went through an excess of $10,000 just making that book. And but yeah, that's life. If you're going to do something like cave photography, where it's a really harsh environment, you're going to destroy some gear along the way.
I'm just trying to understand the timeline here. So what was the process from having that first little digital camera and taking photos of teddy bears to calling up New Zealand Geographic and being like, can I have a job? I mean, how much time passed before you could get to that point?
I think only like a month or two. So literally had a go at it on a caving expedition in Story Pilot, failed, went out, learned how to actually take proper photos, and then went back in within a few weeks, a couple of months maybe, and then took the geo after that. So it was a really short time frame, and then over the next sort of 3 or 4 months, I learned how to actually properly take photos. And I studied followed the work of overseas cave photographers and saw what they were doing. And the real key is actually shifting away from electronic flash guns and using antique flash bulbs. So you can go onto Trade Me and buy these flash bulbs, which were they're no longer made actually, but that were made in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s, and they're one-off use things, but they have about 20 or 30 times more power than an electronic flash gun. So you hardwire them up to a battery, push the button, and they just give out a massive amount of light. You can light up a passage which is 50 to 100 meters wide. Really incredible.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah, and that made the difference actually. For the first time, we could actually light up and photograph our largest enclosed spaces in New Zealand.
So have you done photography in any other harsh environments? I mean, I can't imagine Antarctica is much easier on your camera gear than a cave.
Yeah, and Antarctica was easier actually than photographing in a cave. It's I thought Antarctica would be really challenging because you'd be worried about gear freezing up and all sorts of other things. To be honest, no, it's a lot easier. You're more worried about things like frostbite. There's nothing as harsh as photographing in a cave where you're just covered in mud and dripping with water, and you try to use these expensive electronic flash guns and flash bulbs that often won't work, and it's really tricky. And I think the other thing with cave photography is it's with most forms of photography, just one person pushes the button. In cave photography, it's a team that takes the photo. So you've got 4 or 5 people there. You've got people hiding behind rocks, holding flash guns, posing for shots. So it really is a collective. On most shots, you only see one model in the shot, and the reality is there's 4 people hiding behind the scenes.
I'm sorry to keep dwelling on this point, but I just find it astounding that it took you a month to go from learning to photograph to photographing for one of the best magazines in New Zealand. So at what age did you sort of pick up that camera, and how did that play out in terms of seeming legitimate to a publication?
I guess they were pretty desperate at the time for someone that could. I think it was more important for them to have someone that was a caver rather than someone that was a photographer, if that makes sense. So they wanted someone that could, operate in that environment and not get flustered. And that's probably more important than the photography skills, which you can learn reasonably quickly. And I think photography is. I mean, I always think of photography as a medium for telling a story, rather than a separate skill. It's probably more important to have ideas and be able to imagine the photos in your mind than actually be good technically.
So how long ago was it that you first started?
2013, 2014. was sort of when I kicked off. I think it's 2013 we did the New Zealand Geo story, and then I didn't go. I went full time about 2 or 3 years ago, so I just sort of dabbled for a while. I was working as an outdoor instructor, and so I was getting pretty tired of working as an instructor with kids, and decided finally to go full time.
Wow.
What's life like as a full-time photographer? I imagine it's going to be quite challenging at times.
Yeah, so you do lots of different jobs. So one day you might be out with an Indian model, for instance, and then the next day you're out on an assignment for something like New Zealand Geographic. So it's really varied. But what I think is really cool, especially work like the New Zealand Geo work, is it gives you a backdoor pass to worlds you wouldn't get to see otherwise, you know. So like we just did a story on the Papara track, and just doing a story at the moment on the beach mast year. So collecting the beach tree seeds using helicopters in the backcountry in New Zealand. And you wouldn't get to do those sorts of things if you weren't a photographer. So you kind of just gives you this fantastic backdoor pass to these other worlds.
Well, one of those worlds would have to be Antarctica, wouldn't it? Where you went last year to document an expedition to drill deep into the ice, you know, in a way to sort of better understand the history of our planet, essentially. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, that's right, Jabby. Yeah, so the goal was to do the first motorised traverse since Hillary across the Ross Ice Shelf, which is the Ross Ice Shelf's an area the size of France. So we flew down to Ross Island, which is where Scott Base is, and then and spent 12 days prepping, and we had these large vehicles which look a lot like a snow groomer, which had been brought in from Germany. And then we loaded them up with everything you could think of. Kind of looked like a Kiwi camping trip gone wrong. Just loaded to the hilt and then headed out across the Ross Ice Shelf. And so it was a convoy of 4 vehicles, and the front vehicle has GPR, ground penetrating radar. So it's searching for crevasses. So it's basically a sort of kind of looks like almost like a tractor with a big boom out the front and GPR on the front. And they've got about 5 seconds to stop if they come across a crevasse. So they're one person sitting on a computer, one person's driving, and driving it between 5 and 10 kilometres across the ice shelf. And we travelled for 16, sometimes 18 hours a day, just doing huge miles. And eventually we set up camp and we did a hot water drilling exercise. So using, it's pretty much like it sounds, so using basically like a shower head which carves its way down through the ice and down to the ocean below. And the goal was to try and work out if the ice shelf was melting from below with climate change, and also some secondary goals like looking for life. Like this, the area underneath the Ross Ice Shelf is the largest enclosed space in the world. You know, it's a void which is on a scale it's really hard to imagine. And before that expedition, you know, we didn't even know if there was any form of life underneath there. So we're searching for life and also the main sort of goal of climate change. So no, that was absolutely fascinating.
What's it like living and working in those kind of conditions?
Cold.
Other than cold.
Yeah, it's pretty much like a caving expedition, actually. So you're with this little tight knit group of people, and you can't get very far away from each other. And you're living in tents. So we're on the ice shelf for I think 4.5 weeks in tents, and it was interesting. What was quite neat was to see how the group dynamic would change every time. So once we'd driven to that location, we would have scientists about once a week when the weather allowed, flying in a small plane. And every time some new people would arrive, the whole group dynamic would really change. But no, it was cool, a pretty amazing experience. And, one of the interesting things was how much fuel we used. Like, even though we're there for climate change research, we burned through massive amounts of fuel. That we used enough fuel to drive a Toyota Corolla around the world 17 times on that expedition.
That's a lot of fuel.
It's a lot of fuel, yeah.
And so what did you learn about sort of the direction our planet is heading in and climate change, and what is the science telling us based on what you experienced in Antarctica?
So I did a really interesting interview when I first arrived with Wolfgang Rack, and Wolfgang Reck is a charismatic Austrian, which is rare. Hopefully Wolfgang doesn't hear this, which is rare for an Austrian. And so we were sitting inside Scott Base, and Scott Base has this little library. You've got these massive glass windows which look out over the Ross Ice Shelf. The ice shelf is about 300 metres thick, and as we said earlier, about the size of France, and you can just look maybe 50 to 100 kilometres out there and see nothing but ice shelf. And anyway, I asked Wolfgang Reck, if we looked out this window in 50 years' time, what would we see? And Wolfgang said you would see open ocean. The ice shelf would be gone. And that was really hard hitting. And what happens is if that ice shelf is released, it releases the West Antarctic ice sheet, which is about 4 to 5 metres of sea level rise. So
wow.
That's insane.
Yeah, on our life. And as far as the drilling exercise went, so we're drilling down through that ice shelf, try and work out if the ocean was warmer or not. And I believe that they discovered that the ocean was just very slightly warmer, so parts of a degree, so it's warming very slowly. But in other parts of Antarctica, like the Antarctic Peninsula, where Larsen A and Larsen B have already collapsed, we found that the warming's much more dramatic than it is at the Ross Ice Shelf at the moment.
So you're telling me that a leading climate scientist you talked to said within the space of 50 years we could see 4 to 5 metres of sea level rise?
You'd see the beginning of 4 to 5 metres of sea level rise. So that would be the ice shelf failed. And if the ice shelf fails, basically that means the velocity rate of the ice sheet speeds up dramatically, and so we would start to see that sea level rise really quickly. So we could see huge changes in our lifetime. That's
so sobering. How did this opportunity come up?
So once a year you can apply to go down on the Antarctic Artist and Media Program, and so they send a range of sort of journalists or all sorts of people, anyone that can tell their story or tell the story about Antarctic science or particularly climate change down. And so I just simply applied under that and got the gig, which is pretty cool. And so if you ever get the opportunity to go to Antarctica, it's worth it. It's pretty amazing. Even like from the second you step off that plane, you're in this fairy tale like world, and it's hard to describe. It's pretty surreal, pretty special.
Do you feel like a sense of privilege or perhaps a sense of responsibility to tell these stories, going to these places that not many people can go to and highlighting what's going on there? Yeah,
I'm optimistic about the future of humans, but also concerned as well. And so I guess when I started out as a photographer, the first stories I was focused on were about adventure and exploration. And now I feel like I'd like to shift far more over to environmental issues and the big issues that we have to tackle. So, for instance, at the moment, working on a story on tourism in the west coast of the South Island, and also looking at a story on the hoki fishery, for example. So we're seeing some big changes with the hoki fishery there, and some calls or some theories around the fact it could be collapsing. So I want to focus in on stories like that in the future.
No, very cool. I mean, we can't really talk to you about photography without talking about your book, Caves. I've got a copy myself. It's actually a signed copy, and it's incredible. Like, it's one of my favorite books to show people on my coffee table. The photography is amazing, and the stories about the caves are just insane. How did the idea for that book come about?
That was a really nice ad there, Andrew. There's a bottle of water coming your way. Yeah. How did Cave start? So Marcus Thomas and I were walking down the Pierce River coming out of Mount Arthur, and Marcus had this idea of a narrative-focused caving book, and I had an idea for kind of like a coffee table picture book, and we put those ideas together and did Caves. And yeah, we wanted to do something which would challenge the perception of self-publishing. So I think the perception in New Zealand, generally speaking, if a book's self-published, it's not going to be as good as if it was put through a publisher. And so we put the hard yards into it and tried to do something, which was pretty good, as good as we could do. And the whole goal was the same as what we started with cave photography, was to try and change those perceptions of how people see caves as dark, dirty places ready to collapse at any given second, filled with spiders, to some of the most amazing places we have in New Zealand, the largest enclosed spaces, some of the most beautiful places you can imagine, great medium for adventure. And it's done pretty well, and it was a cool process and a cool journey.
Just a fan question, but is there a sequel plan?
No, I think I'm done with cave photography. And I don't think I can afford to become a cave photographer.
There's only so many times your insurance company will let you ruin a camera in the bath before they start asking questions, eh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, they had a good sense of humour, the insurance company, drone and a 5D, but yeah. No, I don't think I'll do. I think I'm pretty much done with cave photography. There's potentially a film series coming up. It's a 5-part documentary series on cave exploration that could kick off early this year if we get the funding. So that would be quite neat. But other than that, no. Definitely thinking about a book on Antarctica at the moment. And so there's all this incredible science going on, and all based out of Ross Island, out of the Kiwi base and the next door American base. So that would be really cool to cover that.
No, very cool.
So you've been involved with caving from a very young age. I'm just wondering, what are some of the most exciting cave explorations either happening in New Zealand at the moment or explorations that you've been involved in yourself? I'm just thinking of things like the Bulmer Cavern, trying to connect the missing links through there and that kind of thing. What would you say are some of the most exciting caving expeditions going on at the moment?
I think the two most exciting caving expeditions would be Bulmer Cavern and the work in the Pierce Resurgence. So Bulmer is a puzzle, really. It's this monstrous system. It's 74 kilometres long. And when we say 74 kilometres, it's not linear. It's kind of like if you got some cooked spaghetti and dropped it on the ground and looked down on top of it. So you've got, that's kind of how the cave map would look, with passages going over, under, and in all directions. It's just a tangled maze of cave, and it's slowly spreading out into the mountain. So at the moment, that 74 kilometres is locked into an area of about 3 kilometres by 2 kilometres, and each year it slowly creeps back further into the hill. And a few years ago, we did a dye trace, so we put the dye in at the very end of the cave system, and it should have just flowed back down through known passages and come out, but it actually went the opposite direction. It did a 180 and it flowed. So it should have gone south in the mountain and come out at Bulmer Creek, but it flowed north and came out 8.6 kilometres away at Blue Creek. And that was probably the most exciting moment of my life, and it meant that that system is potentially going to grow right the way through the mountain and come out the other side. And if you think about the fact that, there's 74 kilometres locked into such a small space, and we now know that it goes at least 8.6 kilometres, it could be in the hundreds of kilometres long, or it will be in the hundreds of kilometres long. People will be exploring Bulmer long after we're dead. It feels like an infinite system, and that's pretty cool. And we've got no idea what we'll find in there.
Do you think it's going to pass 100 kilometres anytime soon?
Anytime soon. Well, not if I spend all my time doing podcasts rather than filming. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think it went up something like 500 metres this summer on the recent expedition, so it is slowly creeping up. But there's hope. I would say within 10 years we'll see the 100-kilometre mark. That's just a guess, but hopefully. There's not enough cavers in New Zealand, to be honest. Like, it's just a very, very small group of people doing all the cave exploration. We just need a lot more people involved in the sport.
Neil, I know you're trying to do your best to change the public perception of caves and caving, but have you yourself had any scary experiences underground or in caves at all?
Yeah, so I actually got stuck in a squeeze. So I was going down through a body-tight squeeze, and I had my hands above my head. We're in a brand new cave, which is about 50 metres long, and we found it in the bush on the west coast, and two of us there. And so the other person went out for help, and as they went out through the bush, they left a trail of pink markers. We only roughly knew where we were. It's just, it's karst, so it's an area with just hundreds and hundreds of holes, and they just took a compass bearing and left this trail of markers through the bush, and I ended up getting a bit lost, I think, doing a couple of loops on the way and coming out after 4 hours. And so, I was left hanging there. Basically, my helmet had jammed into the crack, and arms above my head, and my feet couldn't touch the ground. And it started raining outside, and so caves are kind of like drains, really. So every drop of water comes together and flows down the nearest hole. And so I had a waterfall come down on my head, and it washed in tons of other gravels. And I slowly got buried, and I got buried right up to my fingertips. And about that point, I became religious. I said that if I survive this, I'll become a good Christian and go to church every day.
How did that work out?
Yeah, it lasted about 8 hours. Yeah. And then eventually the rescuers came back in, and they started a grid search of the cast, and it took a long time. They finally picked up that tape trail, and I'd been there for 8 hours, and they arrived, and still alive. And so they tied a rope around someone's ankles and lowered in a young fella called Crispin Sher, and he slowly, bit by bit, dug the hole out and cut my chin strap, and I fell free. And shed a tear and walked out. So that was pretty interesting, and still feel very claustrophobic from that.
It didn't put you off caving though?
Oh, I did for about 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. I didn't think I'd ever cave again. I didn't think I'd use my arms again, actually, just the pressure. And but you appreciate life more. Like after that, I really came to appreciate being alive and daylight, and
Hey, we're interrupting the show briefly for a segment that we call A Bit of Kit. This is where we ask our guest what's the one thing that they absolutely can't live without in the outdoors. The bit of kit that comes with them on every adventure.
I would say my 5D camera. It's it's just about unkillable unless you place it 1 meter underneath the water for 10 seconds like I did once before. No, it's a fantastic piece of gear. Can't beat the Canon 5D Mark III series.
What's so special or good about the 5D?
It's almost indestructible, so it's a workhorse of a camera. So you can, some of the gear you buy these days, it lasts for 10 seconds. The 5D lasts a lifetime. So I don't even carry a backup camera in the field. I've just never had one fail. It's just an absolute workhorse of a camera.
That was a bit of kit. Now let's get back to the show. I bet. Well, speaking of somewhat scary or dangerous experiences, what was the idea behind going to Afghanistan?
Yeah, so Afghanistan, I had a friend give me a call out of the blue, and she wanted to work in Afghanistan as a mountain guide in Bamyan province, which is one of the safer provinces of Afghanistan. So she wanted someone to go along, and the company she was working with actually needed a photographer, so I went over as a photographer, and so we flew into Kabul, into the capital, and straight away, like, the local guides picked us up in a beat up old Toyota Corolla, and the people getting into the vehicle next to us, other Westerners off the flight, put on bulletproof vests and then hopped into a car with bulletproof windows and guards with machine guns and everything else, and we just hopped into this dodgy old beaten up Toyota Corolla. Yeah, and we said, look, the best thing we can do to keep you safe is keep a low profile. If you're in an SUV like that with bulletproof windows and all the rest, you're going to be a target, and that was true. So we were fine. We could travel around the city and whatnot, and just sort of blend in and just stayed with the locals once we're in the capital, and then from there we were going to fly from that town over to Bamyan, but unfortunately the old Russian aircraft which are used as the airliner there had broken down, and so we had two choices: either go home or drive through something called Death Highway, which is only partially controlled by the army, and at times in places partially controlled by the Taliban and whatnot. So next day they dressed us up as locals, and so
Wow.
full of clothing, and then 5 a.m. they banged us into the back of a van, sitting between locals, cameras down, didn't even tell the driver that they had Westerners on board, and they snuck us through. And so, it was terrifying. So 5 hours driving through lots of areas, and just kind of keep your head down and hope for the best. And we made it. So, yeah.
Did you become religious for a moment on that trip as well?
Yeah, just about. Pretty scary. So what the Taliban were doing, there'd been a lot of attacks on that road, and you'd see the burnt out vehicles and the blown up tanks and all the rest. There's a war zone, and what the Taliban were doing was using spotters on the road. So they'd have people sitting on the road all the time with a cell phone, watching all the vehicles going through, looking for anyone they wanted to grab along the way. So so got away with it. And then once we're in Bamyan it's like stepping out. Every time you'd step out of your accommodation, it's like stepping out into the pages of a National Geographic magazine. Like just behind the accommodation was these towering Buddhas, the world's largest Buddhas, which had actually, funny enough, had been blown up by the Taliban. And then there's people still living in caves. And there's hundreds of cave entrances all across the cliffs there, man-made, and along the base of that, you see smoke coming out of the cave entrances where people were still living. So really, really simple living conditions, and people still, riding donkeys around the town and dirt streets, and really big, 4,000 metre high mountains in the background with snow over it. Just feel like you're stepping out on the pages of a National Geographic magazine.
Yeah, that's just incredible.
Oh, it was, yeah. So photographer's dream. So,
would you go back?
Oh, in a second, yeah. Yep. Yeah, both that and Antarctica were the best experiences of my life. It was pretty amazing. So we were the only Westerners there, and we had the place to ourselves, and it was safe. Once you're in Bamyan, you're safe. You're outside the Taliban-controlled areas or disputed areas where the army have absolute control in that area. So I cycled for 70 kilometres one day. Would hitchhike around the place, go ski touring in the mountains. It's fantastic. And so the person I was there with, Heidi Godfrey, is a New Zealand mountain guide, and she was teaching 3 local Afghanis how to mountain guide as well. And which is really funny for blokes in Afghanistan to have a woman come in and teach them was quite a big deal. So women are treated like second-class citizens, or pretty much goes cattle. Women very slightly above children, and then men. So the women are treated very badly in general, and so they're not treated as equals as they would be in a Western society necessarily. And so she actually came in and taught those guys how to teach backcountry ski touring, and then at the end of that month, there's some Westerners arrive, which she guided around the place, and then there's a race, which is all the local Afghanis ski tour up a hill, which is about 400 or 500 meters high, and take the skins off and ski down. And so it's quite a big thing where they will train up for this big race. And I went in the race, and most of these guys are super fit. They're acclimatized to the altitude. They're living at 4,000 meters all the time, and so there's no way. I knew I was going to pretty much come last. But just at the start line, we actually went downhill a little bit first, and then started to go uphill. And so we're on the start line with probably about maybe 80 people or something there. And Heidi gave me a tip, which was to leave my skins on, and I'd go a little bit slow down the downhill, but wouldn't have any problems with the transition. So we all go down the downhill. I was a little bit slower than everyone else, and they're all on the transition line trying to get their skins on, and I just turned the corner and skinned up the hill, and I was in first place. So exciting. And then I looked behind me, and there's about 40 people yelling at me to get out the way. And I did all right. I came in about 20th or something. So, really instant.
Is there anywhere you wouldn't go as a photographer? Is there anything you'd consider too dangerous, like either politically or just from actual risks?
I don't think I'd go to full on. Like, I wouldn't go to full on war zone, say other parts of Afghanistan, for instance, or Iraq, and I wouldn't go in those places without some form of protection. So we were with a company, working for a company which had a good safety plan in place. Have thought, I've often dreamed of doing something like on the New Zealand Defence Forces in Iraq, doing a story on those guys, but you'd be well protected. So I think something like that would be fine. But that would probably be the limit for me.
Very cool. What's the reality of being a photographer like? Like, it sounds wonderful going to Afghanistan and going to Antarctica, but what's it like day to day when you're actually doing that as a job?
I'd say you better like noodles. So you're not going to make a lot of money is the problem with photography. So yeah, it's a tough way to survive because you're putting so much money into gear and equipment all the time. You've got other costs like travel and the work can be really sporadic. So it's there one second and not the next second. So yeah, if you've got to be someone that can survive off very little and be really flexible, and you're not going to have a secure income for the rest of your life. And if you're fine with that, then it's a fantastic job. If you're not, then it's going to be a real challenge. If you own your own house, it makes a big difference. So we know we've got a dodgy falling down house in Blackpool, which is held together by paint, and we're happy with that and live a simple life. And we as photographers, great.
So how do you make it work, like in terms of securing enough work and assignments to just keep the bank balance ticking over?
It all seems to work out. I think if you're driven, you've got lots of ideas for stories. There's plenty of work out there as a photographer with various magazines. So the other thing is on selling. So you'll sell a story to, say, the New Zealand Geographic, and then you might on sell it to an Australian magazine or another New Zealand magazine, and having lots of clients, and you'll find that you spend as much time marketing as you do out there taking photos a lot of the time. So, and being able to write as well, like a lot of these magazines and people like the School Journal is a really good client as well, will want you to be able to write as well as take photos. So if you can do both of those mediums, then you're sorted.
I'm just kind of curious, like as a professional photographer, do you have an opinion on the rise of like Instagram travel and adventure photography? Does that annoy you at all?
No, not at all. I think what I worry about sometimes is that you often turn up to touristy spots and people are systematically photographing everything. So there'll be every meal is photographed, every step that they take just about is photographed, the bus is photographed, the scene. And I worry sometimes that we forget to see if we're really focused on looking through the viewfinder and just photographing everything. We often forget to actually see and to remember those experiences and be part of that scene. Even like I find that all the time. If I'm out photographing, I'm really not aware of my surroundings at all. I'm just focused on the image and getting the shot and looking through the viewfinder. And we've got to remember to actually enjoy the experience and being there as well. And also, if you take thousands and thousands of photographs of absolutely everything, then you spend thousands of hours on your computer processing and deleting. So yeah.
Is there any photo you've taken that you're particularly proud of, and a story behind? Like, can you tell us the story behind how you got it?
Yeah. Yep. So there was a shot taken in Bulma. You've probably seen this, Andrew. It's in the book, and it's a step across photo. So
yes.
Yeah. So big sort of round tube at the top, and then a little canyon below, and it's pretty typical of what we do in Bulma. The further you get into Bulma Cavern, the less ropes there are and the more risk you have to take. So there's exposed climbs all the way through the cave, but just we can't carry that rope all the way through. So it gets dodgier and dodgier the further back you go. And that's kind of typical of the sort of stuff you do. It's just stepping across the void. It's sort of day-to-day caving, but it's got a lot of tension in the shot. You don't know whether the person's going to make it or not. And what actually happened originally is we set up a shot. We were just going to do it as a static sort of shot. Everyone was standing around with flash guns and whatnot, and took a shot, and the lighting was really cool, but it was quite boring. And then so we thought if we add some motion and movement into it and show the risk, and that photo's done really well. It's sold all around the world, and probably the photo that sold best out of everything, any shots I've ever taken. And I guess the thing everyone's got a different view on what makes a good photo, but I think it's a little bit like music. You're trying to convey energy and make people feel something. In this case, they probably look at that and feel scared and wonder if the person makes it or not. And so, yeah, if you can make people feel something, you've generally got a photo that's going to do well.
Yeah, nice. Do you have any advice for aspiring young photographers who might want to follow in your steps one day?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of work out there if you've got something to say as a photographer. So if you've got some new angles and some new ideas and some new stories, then I think you do really well. But I get asked that all the time, how do I become a professional photographer? And people's perception of what the job's like and what it's actually like is really different. And I think, a lot of people coming in just try and do the same sorts of stories and work, and that's really hard to do, to compete with everybody else. But if you've got some new ideas and some new stories to tell, then you'll do really well. Go for it. It's a fantastic job. It really is. As good as you can get.
No, cool. Have you got anything exciting lined up for the near future?
So we've potentially got a film series on the go. So 5 parts of exploration throughout the country. So that's looking really promising, and working on a story on tourism. So it's sort of looking at, so it's New Zealand geographic story on going from raw extractive industries on the west coast to sustainable tourism and seeing if that's possible. So at the moment, it's clearly not possible. Well, it's not working because the way we're doing tourism on the west coast is just not sustainable. We're developing lots of precious areas like the Oparara or the glaciers area to allow for more and more tourists every year. So it's a feature looking into that, and also we're doing a dye trace in Cave and Wise. So in my own recreational time, we're doing a dye trace in the Fox River area. So we're trying to understand the hydrology of a area of karst that no one knows almost anything about by putting in fluorescein, this dye that's visible, 4 parts per million, like a teaspoon, into an Olympic swimming pool would go bright green. So we're trying to understand how the hydrology of that karst area works. So some fun work projects and some fun personal projects as well.
Keeping that work-life balance sounds good.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode, Neil. But thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been super interesting. I really enjoyed all the crazy stories you had to share. But I'm sure we'll get you on again sometime as you continue to do this type of work and cover different and interesting stories and have other crazy experiences that you can share with us. But thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, no worries. It was fun. Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning into the show.
If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe on iTunes, like our Facebook page, and follow us on Instagram @The Wild Podcast.